The LED display on Ethan Grant's desk phone clicked over to 6 p.m., the digits shifting with an almost mechanical precision. His hands hovered above the keyboard, pausing just long enough to save his latest tweaks to the Sanders proposal. Outside his corner office at Carter & Hayes Engineering, the Dallas skyline burned with a warm, orange glow from the October sunset, while the GL towers across the city caught the light and reflected it back like tiny beacons. Ethan closed his project management software with deliberate, steady clicks. On his second monitor, rows of perfectly organized spreadsheets displayed every detail, project completion rates, resources assigned, and deadline progress for all the firm's key projects, each meticulously tracked, all firmly in his control. The old analog clock on the wall ticked in sync with his motions as he went through his evening ritual, shutting down his laptop, tidying up his already spotless desk, and finally checking his phone. Once again, no messages from Jenna. "You're as polished as always," came the familiar voice of Jake Adams from the doorway. Ethan looked up to see his friend and longtime colleague leaning against the frame, his tie loosened, jacket slung casually over one shoulder. "We're heading over to McKinney's. Harder's buying the first round to celebrate landing the Wesper contract." Ethan adjusted his tie, steel gray, with a perfectly dimpled knot, and caught his reflection in the window. At 42, he wore the signs of someone who took care of himself like the machines he managed, consistent workouts, a disciplined diet, everything kept in check to perform at his peak. His cool, steel blue eyes scanned his own reflection, checking for any flaws. "Appreciate it, but Jenna's getting back from Seattle tonight," Ethan replied, his tone calm and composed, the same steady voice that had helped him rise to his current role. Jake's easygoing expression shifted a little, barely noticeable. "Another business trip, huh? Seems like she's been out of town more than she's been home lately." Ethan slipped his laptop into the compartment of his briefcase, masking the slight tension in his shoulders. That's the pace in tech these days. Her company's growing fast, and these trips are big opportunities for her career. "Yeah, I get it," Jake said, stepping fully into the office and closing the door behind him. "But look, man, we've known each other since grad school. I stood beside you at your wedding, remember? I can tell something's been off with you lately. Want to talk?" The offer lingered in the room. Ethan glanced down at his phone once more, still no messages, and then looked up. "Everything's fine, Jake. I'm just focused on the Sanders proposal. The client wants to move up the schedule." Jake dropped into one of the guest chairs across from Ethan's desk. "Ethan, you've been checking that phone every 5 minutes, working overtime even though you usually run this place like clockwork. And I've noticed you haven't brought Jenna up in any of our meetings lately. What's really going on?" Ethan leaned back in his ergonomic chair, studying his friend. Jake had always been the more perceptive one, quick to pick up on people's emotions while Ethan focused more on facts and figures. Maybe that's why their friendship had lasted so long, they balanced each other out. "Ever look at something you built from the ground up?" Ethan began, his words chosen with his usual care, and felt sure it was rock solid, only to spot tiny cracks sneaking into the foundation. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Are we talking buildings or marriages here? Both need routine inspection and upkeep." Ethan pulled up his phone calendar. "Jenna's been out of town for 3 weeks every month since June, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, Boston. Always something last minute, another urgent client presentation. That's pretty common in her line of work, right?" Jake leaned forward, his face showing genuine concern. "Tech's always in a mad dash to stay ahead." "Yeah, but it's the consistency that stands out." Ethan opened his desk drawer and took out a small leather notebook. "Last week, I was digging in her purse for the car keys and found this." He slid a crumpled receipt across the desk. "Dinner for 2 at Camus in Seattle, $800. With wine pairings. And dessert." Jake gave a low whistle. Quite a tab for a business dinner. It was on a Tuesday. She was supposed to be at a team conference that night. I asked her about it later, and she went on about how productive the group discussions were. Ethan's tone stayed steady, but his knuckles tightened slightly on the armrest. She looked me in the eye, Jake, and lied. Could be nothing, Jake offered, though he sounded doubtful. Maybe she didn't want you to worry over a pricey meal. Jenna makes twice my salary. She's never worried about spending money. Ethan turned his monitor toward Jake, opening a browser. So I checked out this restaurant. It's famous for its romantic setting, private booths, cozy lighting, panoramic views of Seattle. Not exactly a spot you'd pick for a casual work dinner. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Are you investigating Jenna? I'm collecting data, Ethan said firmly. That distinction meant everything to him. Facts and proof, the same approach he'd take with any potential structural flaw. Marriage isn't some engineering project, Ethan. You can't just. A sudden knock cut him off. Kathy, Ethan's assistant, poked her head in. Mr. Grant, the contractors for the Sanders site are online too. There's an issue with the foundation specs. I'll handle it, Ethan said, reaching for the phone. Then he looked back at Jake. Thanks for the invite, Jake. Let's catch up another time. Jake rose, recognizing the end of the conversation. Just tread carefully, all right? Sometimes digging for issues is enough to create them. After Jake left, Ethan spent the next 45 minutes going through the specs with the contractors, his tone steady and professional, never revealing the storm churning beneath his calm exterior. By the time he hung up, darkness had fully settled, leaving the office bathed in fluorescent light. The drive home took precisely 27 minutes, just as it did every night. He pulled into the driveway at 7:12 p.m., noting the empty spot where Jenna's Tesla should be. The Tudor-style house rose before him, all clean lines and immaculate landscaping, a solid symbol of the order he needed in his life. Inside, he moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of habit. Jenna's high-end appliances gleamed in the soft light, marble countertops flawless, all part of the renovation she had spearheaded last year. He opened the refrigerator, staring at the perfectly arranged meal prep containers he'd put together on Sunday. Cooking for one, once again. A vibration from his phone caught his attention, flight delayed. Weather in Seattle. Don't wait up. Love you. He read the message several times, picking apart each word as though deciphering a code. The tone was Jenna all over, efficient, businesslike, and distant, much like the woman she had grown into at 36. He opened his weather app, and Seattle was showing clear skies. He typed a response, drive safe. Let me know when you're home. Direct, simple, trusting, even as the evidence against that trust continued to pile up. Rather than sitting down to dinner, Ethan withdrew into his home office, a sanctuary lined with shelves of engineering books and stacked with industry awards. His gaze drifted to a framed photo on the desk, a snapshot of him and Jenna in Maui, celebrating their 5th anniversary. Her dark hair caught the sunset, and she wore a radiant smile directed squarely at him. That had been 3 years ago. When had her smile changed? When had she started looking past him instead of into his eyes? As his computer powered up, Ethan instinctively navigated to their shared cloud storage. Images from Jenna's recent work trips filled his screen, shots of conference rooms, slides from presentations, group photos with her team. Everything was perfectly polished, meticulously professional, yet there was something staged about them, like flawless architectural blueprints that could never quite come to life. A new email notification appeared, sent from Jenna's account, access he discreetly obtained just a week earlier. His mouse hesitated over it before he opened the message. The sender's name brought a heaviness to his chest, Marcus Hale. Jenna, the Seattle views were almost as spectacular as the company. Your thoughts on market penetration strategy were brilliant, though I confess I had other kinds of penetration in mind during dinner. Can't wait for Chicago next month. I've reserved our usual suite, much more private than Camus, but that restaurant was worth the gamble. Your husband must be quite trusting or blissfully ignorant. Either way, his loss is my gain. Already missing you, M. Ethan read it through 3 times, every line burning deeper into his mind. His fingers remained calm as he took screenshots, storing them in a secure folder. Moments later, a reply from Jenna popped up, "Marcus, you're awful, but I can't stop smiling." Ethan suspects nothing. He never questions my trips. Sometimes I wonder if he even notices I'm gone, so caught up in his schedules and projects, planning everything but never really living. Chicago can't get here fast enough. I've got something special picked out to wear, or not wear. Counting down. J. The words should have hurt, maybe even driven him to anger, to rage, to breaking something. But instead, a cold clarity settled over him. Every lie, every betrayal, each insult to his trust became one more data point in an equation he'd soon be solving. His phone buzzed with another message, "Just landed, grabbing an Uber. Be home in 30. Ethan checked the flight tracker he'd been monitoring. Her plane had touched down nearly an hour earlier. Another lie. Another piece for his mounting file of evidence. He heard the front door creak open at exactly 11:47 p.m. Ethan stayed in his office, listening to the familiar routine of her arrival, wheels rolling on the hardwood, heels tapping, the quiet thud of her bags hitting the floor. "Ethan." Her voice echoed up the stairs. "You still up?" He took a second to close all his windows on the screen before answering, "In the office." Jenna appeared at the doorway, looking surprisingly fresh for someone who'd supposedly been on the road all day. Her blazer was unrumpled, her makeup flawless and recently applied. He noted clinically the faint scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to her clothes. "You didn't have to stay up," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Ethan turned slightly, making the gesture awkward. "How was the teen conference?" he asked, watching her closely. "Productive." "Long, but productive," Jenna replied, running her hand through her hair, a nervous tic she didn't realize she had, one he'd only picked up on since all this had started. "We're looking at some big expansions into new markets. Tons of growth potential." "I'm sure there is," Ethan replied evenly. "Did the whole team make it out there?" "Most of them, yeah." "Why?" "Just curious. You'd mentioned group discussions earlier, but I noticed your schedule mostly showed one-on-one meetings." For a split second, Jenna's expression faltered, and Ethan caught it. Years of examining structural stress points had fine-tuned his ability to spot even the slightest signs of weakness. "You've been checking my calendar?" Jenna asked, her tone edged with suspicion. "It's on our shared family account," Ethan replied, turning his attention back to the computer. "Same as it's been for the last 8 years. "Right. Of course." Jenna shifted her weight slightly, a subtle giveaway. "Listen, I'm beat. Can we catch up tomorrow? Whatever works for you." She lingered in the doorway. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine." The lie tasted heavy in his mouth. "Just focused on work. You know how I get with deadlines." Jenna visibly relaxed. "There's my Ethan. Always the perfectionist. Don't stay up too late." After she left, Ethan reopened his secure folder, adding more notes from tonight's encounter, the unfamiliar cologne, her flawless makeup, the lies about delayed flights and supposed team meetings. Each detail was another block in the solid wall of evidence he was building. The following morning, Ethan carried out his routine with his usual precision. He was up at 5:30 a.m. for a workout in his home gym, showered by 6:44, and eating a breakfast of steel-cut oats and black coffee by 7:15. He listened to Jenna moving around upstairs, noticing how she waited until he was nearly out the door to come down. "Early meeting?" she asked, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "Henderson Project," Ethan replied, straightening his tie in the hallway mirror. "Had to make some adjustments to the foundation specs." Sounds riveting, Jenna said with a faint hint of sarcasm he realized he hadn't noticed before. I might be working late tonight, got quarterly reports to go over. Of course, Ethan said, picking up his briefcase. Don't overdo it. At the office, Ethan dove into work with even greater focus than usual, reviewing proposals, meeting with clients, and updating project timelines with practiced efficiency. But underneath every task, his mind continued processing the deeper problem unfolding in his life. "Earth to Ethan," came Jake's voice, breaking his concentration. Ethan looked up to see Jake standing in front of his desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've been staring at the same page for the last 10 minutes. Just being thorough," Ethan said, taking the coffee Jake offered. "Thanks." "All right, spill it." Jake took a seat, his face serious. "What did you find?" Ethan weighed his words carefully. Jake had been there for all of it, college, career moves, his wedding. If anyone could understand the gravity of what he'd uncovered, it was Jake. I have proof," Ethan finally said, lowering his voice. "Emails between Jenna and this investment consultant, Marcus Hale. They've been meeting in different cities, coordinating their stories, laughing about how I never question a thing." "Damn." Jake set his coffee down. "Are you absolutely sure? Could it be something else?" "There's no room for doubt." Ethan pulled up one of the emails on his screen, turning it so Jake could read. "They're barely trying to hide it anymore. Private dinners, hotel rooms, jokes about my trust. What's your plan?" "For now, nothing." Ethan closed the email. "I'm collecting more details, on both of them." "Both?" "Marcus Hale has quite the track record," Ethan said, opening another file. "He's been through multiple SEC investigations, but nothing stuck. There are rumors about insider trading, client fraud, some shady accounting practices. He's got a history of using people, especially women in high positions, to get access to companies and sensitive information. And Jenna, she's either an accomplice or another one of his pawns." Ethan's tone was ice cold. "One way or another, they'll both learn there are consequences for their actions." Jake leaned in, his tone urgent. "Just don't do anything rash. Maybe talk to her first. People make mistakes. Relationships can be. Relationships are built on trust," Ethan interrupted, "just like buildings are built on solid foundations. Once either is compromised, the entire structure becomes dangerous. The only safe solution is controlled demolition." That evening, Ethan purposefully altered his usual routine. Instead of leaving at 6 p.m., he stayed late, using the office's secure network to continue his investigation. Social media posts from Jenna's colleagues showed no mention of a teen conference in Seattle. Her credit card statements revealed purchases from boutiques and hotels he'd never heard of. Each discovery was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. When Ethan finally walked through the door after midnight, he found Jenna waiting up, sitting on one of the kitchen bar stools with a glass of wine in hand. She was wearing silk pajamas, new ones, he noted, from a brand he didn't recognize. "Late night?" she asked, her voice casual, though her eyes were sharp. "Project deadline." Ethan set his briefcase down with deliberate care. "You're up late too." "Couldn't sleep." "Probably the jet lag." She took a sip of her wine, leaving a flawless lipstick mark on the glass. "I was thinking about another trip next week. San Francisco this time. Possible new client. Marcus Hale." Ethan let the name slip out with careful timing, watching her face closely. A flash of fear passed over her expression before she smoothed it away, her grip tightening on the glass. "He's an investment consultant we're considering working with." "How do you know that name?" Ethan walked over to the fridge, keeping his movements unhurried. "Came across it in some industry news. He has an interesting reputation." He took out a bottle of water. "Quite a few rumors about how he does business. You can't believe everything you read, Jenna replied quickly, too quickly. Besides, it's just some preliminary meetings. Nothing set in stone. Of course, Ethan said, twisting the cap off his water bottle. I trust your judgment. The lie was bitter, but he kept his expression neutral. Trust had always been his shield, faith in order, loyalty, the sanctity of their vows. Now, that shield was cracking, but he wouldn't let it break. Not yet. I'm heading to bed, Jenna said, sliding off the stool. Her movements were a little too casual, a little too polished. She hesitated briefly before leaning in to kiss him goodnight. Ethan angled his head just enough that her lips landed on his cheek instead of his mouth. Sleep well, he replied in an even tone. Don't let the jet lag keep you up too long. You've got a busy day tomorrow. Once she had gone upstairs, Ethan looked at the half-empty glass she'd left behind. There were 2 lipstick marks on the rim, one fresh, one from earlier. She'd been drinking, likely trying to calm herself after he dropped Marcus's name. He pulled out his laptop and began digging deeper. Marcus Hale's digital footprint was extensive, LinkedIn profiles touting successful ventures, news articles with raised eyebrows about his methods, social media posts showing a life of polished extravagance. The images were consistent, a man in his mid-40s, always in tailored suits, flashing a smile that promised everything and delivered nothing. A notification sounded, a new post from Marcus, thanks to the alerts Ethan had set up on his accounts. It was a picture of a whiskey glass on a hotel bar, tagged at the Langham in Chicago. The caption read, "Getting ready for next week's big meeting. Some opportunities are worth waiting for." Ethan took a screenshot, adding it to his growing evidence file. The timing aligned perfectly with Jenna's supposed business trip. When he finally went upstairs, he saw Jenna lying in bed, seemingly asleep, but a faint glow from her phone screen reflected off the ceiling. She was texting someone, hiding the phone under the covers like a teenager trying to keep a secret. Ethan lay down on his side of the bed, maintaining the space that had grown between them. Sleep didn't come. He just kept planning. The next few days went by in a measured blur. Ethan stuck to his usual routine, giving no outward sign that anything was amiss. But each moment, each encounter was one more chance to gather evidence. At lunch with Jake on Thursday, his friend took one last shot at talking him down. "You've got that look," Jake said, poking at his salad distractedly. "The same look you had right before we tore down the Wilson Bridge project, like you're counting down to something big." "Every structure has a breaking point," Ethan replied, glancing at his phone. Another email from Marcus to Jenna had just arrived. "It's just a matter of calculating the load." "This isn't about load calculations, Ethan. These are people's lives, your life. At least talk to her before you go through with whatever you're planning. Would you give a failing bridge a heads up before tearing it down?" "People aren't bridges," Jake said, his voice rising enough to draw glances from nearby tables. He lowered it again, his tone softer. "Look, I get it, you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But this cold, calculated approach? It's not healthy. Neither is betrayal." Ethan dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "But one of those things is about to face the consequences." That evening, Ethan returned home to find Jenna in their bedroom, packing for her trip to Chicago. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, filled with new clothes he hadn't seen before. "Another trip?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Just 2 days," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Quick meeting with some investors." "With Marcus?" Her hands froze over her suitcase. "He'll be there, along with others. It's a group meeting." "Interesting." Ethan pulled out his phone, his voice sharp in a way she wasn't used to. "Because according to his social media, he's been in Chicago since Monday, staying at the Langham." "Same hotel you've booked, right? Same suite as last time. You're checking up on me?" Jenna's voice rose, a blend of anger and fear. Tracking my travel plans. Why shouldn't I be curious about what my wife's doing with another man? Ethan replied, his tone steady. This is absurd, she snapped, slamming her suitcase shut. You're acting paranoid. Marcus is a business associate. Yes, we're meeting in Chicago, yes, it's the same hotel, that's where all the investors are staying. It's strictly professional. Ethan stepped further into the room, his movements controlled and deliberate. Just like Seattle was professional. The dinner for two at Camus. The usual place, with more privacy than the hotel restaurant. The suite he's already booked for your special reunion. The color drained from Jenna's face. You read my emails. I read everything, Jenna, the emails, the texts, the hotel bills. I've seen the photos, tracked the flights, documented every lie. His voice was chillingly calm. I've watched you build this little fantasy where I'm either too blind or too stupid to notice, where my trust is just another tool for you to use against me. Ethan, please, she reached a hand toward him, stepping closer. It's not what you think. Marcus and I, it's complicated. Well, the business world's about to get a whole lot more complicated for both of you. Ethan held up his phone, showing her the folder of evidence he'd compiled. 8 years of marriage, and you didn't even try to hide it well. You just assumed I'd be too wrapped up in work, too trusting, too pathetic to notice what was going on. That's not fair. You're never really here for me, always focused on work, planning everything, so damn perfect and in control. Marcus, he makes me feel alive. And I'm about to make you both wish you were dead, he said softly, each word precise, as if calculating the specs for a demolition. Enjoy Chicago, Jenna. Be sure to take plenty of pictures with Marcus, they might be the last happy memories either of you have for a long time. He turned and walked out, ignoring her calls for him to come back, to listen, to let her explain. There was nothing left to hear. It was time for action, for consequences, for the kind of cold, calculated justice that would make them both wish they'd never underestimated him. Ethan Grant had built his life on trust and precision. Now, with that trust shattered, precision would be his weapon of choice. The steady glow from Ethan's computer illuminated his home office in the early hours of the morning. It was 3 a.m., and multiple monitors displayed different facets of Marcus Hale's life, each screen revealing a piece of the destruction Ethan was carefully orchestrating. His fingers moved across the keyboard with calculated precision as he logged each detail. Found you, he murmured, clicking through public records on Marcus's past business ventures. Patterns emerged, failed enterprises, investor complaints, SEC probes that seemed to vanish before reaching court. Ethan created a new folder labeled Financial History and began saving documents. His phone buzzed, Jenna's face appeared on the screen, her 5th call since she'd left for Chicago. With a swipe, Ethan declined it and opened her latest text, "Please talk to me. This isn't what you think. We need to discuss this like adults." He allowed himself a cold smile as he replied, "Enjoy your meeting with Marcus." He watched as the 3 typing dots appeared, then disappeared. Reappeared, then vanished again. Finally, a message came through, "You're making a terrible mistake." No, Jenna, Ethan thought to himself. That would be your mistake. A knock at the door made him look up. Jake stood there, concern etched across his face. "Your assistant said you called in sick," he said, stepping into the room. "First time in, 15 years. I needed time to focus." Ethan motioned toward his monitors. "Did you know Marcus Hale has been investigated by the SEC 3 times over the last decade?" Jake slumped into a chair. "Ethan, have you even slept? Sleep isn't efficient right now." Ethan angled one of the monitors toward him. "Look at this pattern. He targets successful women in tech, seduces them, then uses their connections to access insider info. When it all goes south, he somehow shifts the blame onto them. And you think Jenna's either a willing accomplice or his next pawn?" Either way, their little Chicago meeting won't play out like they think. Jake rubbed his forehead, looking uneasy. What exactly are you planning to do? Ethan leaned back, his eyes cold and calculated. Ever watch a controlled demolition, Jake? Where they place the charges on key structural points. Ethan. It's all in the timing. Hit the critical spots in the right order, and the whole structure collapses flawlessly. Jake's face grew more alarmed. Destroy her career. Ethan, that's. She destroyed our marriage, took my trust and turned it into a weapon, made a fool of me. Ethan straightened, adjusting his tie. Now she's going to find out exactly what happens when you underestimate me. And if you're wrong? If there's some other explanation? There's always an explanation, Jake, Ethan replied, shutting down his monitors. Just like there's always a reason why buildings collapse. Doesn't change the fact that they still do. The flight to Chicago was smooth, giving Ethan ample time to review his plans. He organized every piece of evidence into a presentation designed to dismantle Marcus's reputation and destroy any hope of his deal succeeding. But that was only the beginning. As his Uber neared the Langham, Ethan glanced at his phone. A message from one of the investors he'd reached out to. Mr. Grant, we're eager to hear your insights on Mr. Hale's business practices. Dinner at 7. Ethan typed back, looking forward to it. The hotel lobby was a study in luxury, marble floors, crystal accents, the kind of opulence that drew people like Marcus. Ethan approached the front desk, his briefcase gliding silently over the plush carpet. Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you today? Ethan Grant. I should have a suite reserved. The clerk typed quickly on the keyboard. Yes, Mr. Grant. Suite 1842. Would you like help with your bag? No need. Ethan's gaze drifted around the lobby. By the way, I'm meeting some colleagues later. Could you tell me if Marcus Hale has checked in yet? A few more taps on the keyboard. Yes, Mr. Hale is in suite 1940. Would you like me to ring his room? That won't be necessary. Ethan took his key card. I'll see him at dinner. The suite was exactly what he anticipated, understated luxury with a perfect view of Chicago's skyline. Ethan unpacked with precision, hanging his suits carefully before opening his laptop to finalize his preparations. At 6:45 p.m., he stepped into the elevator, wearing his darkest suit and a blood-red tie. The doors were just about to close when he heard a familiar voice call out, "Hold the elevator." Jenna hurried inside, only to stop cold when she saw him. She was dressed in a sleek black cocktail dress he'd never seen before, her makeup flawless, her hair styled elegantly. Her perfume filled the small space. Ethan, her voice faltered. What are you doing here? Going to dinner, he replied, eyes straight ahead. Same as you, I presume. This is crazy. You followed me to Chicago? Followed suggests pursuit, Ethan replied, checking his watch. I'm here for a business meeting with the Carter Group investors. The very same ones you and Marcus are pitching to tonight. The color drained from Jenna's face. What are you planning? You should be more worried about what I've already done. The elevator doors slid open at the restaurant level. Enjoy your evening, Jenna. I know I will. He stepped out, leaving her stunned and silent in the elevator. The maitre d' escorted him to a private dining room, where 3 men in sharp suits waited. Mr. Grant, the eldest of the 3, stood up to shake his hand. I'm Alex Bennett. These are my colleagues, Robert King and Sean Mitchell. We're very interested in hearing what you've discovered about Marcus Hale. Gentlemen. Ethan took his seat and opened his briefcase. I believe you'll find this information quite illuminating. Over the next hour, he presented his findings, bank records revealing questionable transfers, statements from previous victims, and SEC investigation documents that had mysteriously vanished. This is disturbing, Bennett said, leafing through the documents. We were prepared to invest a considerable amount based on Mr. Hale's proposal. I'm sure you were, Ethan said, sipping his water. He's a master of persuasion. Just ask my wife. King's head snapped up. Your wife? Jenna Grant. She'll be joining Mr. Hale for dinner shortly to pitch their project. Ethan's smile was razor-thin. Though I have a feeling that meeting's going to be quite uncomfortable. As if on cue, the restaurant door opened, and Marcus Hale walked in, radiating confidence in his tailored suit. Jenna followed, her face taut with anxiety. They were shown to a table near the windows, positioned perfectly to see into the private dining room. Ethan watched as Marcus caught sight of him, watched recognition dawn, followed by confusion, and then a flicker of alarm as he noticed the Carter Group executives seated around the table. Mr. Hale seems a bit preoccupied, Mitchell commented dryly. He should be, Ethan replied, pulling out one final document. This is a preliminary report I've put together for the SEC concerning his recent activities. I thought you gentlemen might want a look before it's formally filed. Bennett skimmed the report, then exchanged a look with his associates. I think we've seen enough, Mr. Grant. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll be pulling out of any potential investment immediately. My pleasure. Ethan rose, gathering his papers. If you'll excuse me, I believe it's time I formally introduced myself to Mr. Hale. With measured steps, he crossed the restaurant, aware that nearly every eye was following him. Marcus spotted him coming but couldn't escape without causing a scene. Mr. Hale, Ethan said, stopping at their table. I don't think we've met. I'm Ethan Grant. Jenna's husband. Marcus struggled to keep his composure, but Ethan saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. Mr. Grant, this is unexpected. Is it? Ethan pulled out a chair and sat, uninvited. I'd have thought Jenna might have mentioned me. She certainly mentioned you, in her emails. Quite thoroughly, I might add. Ethan, please, Jenna whispered urgently, her tone low and desperate. Not here. Why not here? He asked, his voice carrying just enough to turn a few heads at nearby tables. Isn't this where you two were planning to celebrate your big investment deal? The one that's now off the table? Marcus's face grew hard. I don't know what you think you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Ethan placed his phone on the table, screen up, within Marcus's view. Just like I know exactly what you've been up to. The Carter Group found your background fascinating, especially the parts about your past relationships with female executives. You son of a, Marcus began to rise, but Ethan stopped him cold. Careful, he said in an icy tone. You've got enough on your plate without adding assault charges. Ethan rose slowly, commanding the room with his presence. I've sent copies of everything to the SEC, your board, and a few very interested journalists. By morning, your reputation will be untouchable, in the worst possible way. You're bluffing, Marcus replied, but a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Feel free to find out. Ethan adjusted his tie, calm and composed. And Jenna, don't bother coming back. I've already contacted HR at your company. They're quite eager to review your expenses, especially the ones involving Mr. Hale here. Ethan, wait. Jenna grabbed his arm, her voice cracking. This isn't what you think. I can explain. He glanced at her hand until she let go. There's nothing to explain. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. He turned to Marcus, his tone firm and final. Both of you do. As he walked away, Ethan heard murmurs from surrounding tables and saw phones coming out to capture the scene. By morning, the story would be everywhere, a scandal involving a high-flying investment consultant and a tech executive laid bare. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake, "Did you do it?" Ethan replied, "Demolition complete. Structures coming down exactly as planned." He rode the elevator up to his suite alone, listening to his own heartbeat, a steady rhythm, perfectly controlled. Tomorrow, he'd fly back to Dallas and begin the work of rebuilding his life. But tonight, he would savor the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, the most devastating revenge wasn't explosive or loud, it was cool, calculated, and precise. Just like Ethan Grant himself. 3 months after the incident in Chicago, Ethan sat in his home office, taking in the aftermath of his meticulous takedown. Headlines scrolled across his monitor. Tech investment scandal shakes industry. Hale Enterprises under federal investigation. Executives caught in widespread fraud scheme. A knock at his door pulled him from the screen. Jake entered, carrying a thick manila envelope. "This came for you at the office," he said, placing it on Ethan's desk. "It's Jenna's handwriting." Ethan stared at the envelope without touching it. "You could have thrown it out." "Maybe. But you should probably read it." Jake settled into a chair, leaning forward. "She's lost everything, Ethan, her job, her reputation." "She lost those herself," Ethan replied, his voice cold, as he picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. "Through her own choices. Just read it. I promise I'll never bring her up again." With precise movements, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside, he found a handwritten letter and a stack of documents. "Ethan," the letter began. "By the time you read this, my life will be in shambles. But before you feel triumphant, there are things you need to understand. Yes, I met with Marcus. Yes, we had dinners and meetings, but not for the reasons you think. I was collecting evidence against him, his pattern of exploiting female executives, his fraudulent dealings. I was working with the FBI to build a case. I couldn't tell you, or it would have jeopardized everything. Thanks to your revenge, years of work are now in ruins. Marcus's lawyers are spinning this as a conspiracy, with me as the mastermind. I know you won't believe me, but I've enclosed correspondence with my FBI handlers, dated months before you discovered anything. Check the timestamps. Verify their authenticity, you're thorough at that. I never betrayed you, Ethan. But you betrayed me by not trusting me enough to ask. Jenna." Jake watched Ethan examine the FBI documents, his face impassive. "What does it say?" "It's irrelevant." Ethan set the letter aside, unaffected. "She's trying to manipulate things again. You're not even going to look into it." "I already did," Ethan replied, turning his monitor around. "While you were driving here, I called the FBI field office listed on these papers. It's fake. The agent she mentions doesn't exist." "Damn, Ethan," Jake rubbed his temples. "You can't even read a letter from your wife without checking for lies." "Ex-wife," Ethan corrected. The divorce was finalized last week. Before Jake could respond, Ethan's phone rang, displaying an unknown number. "Ethan Grant." "Mr. Grant," a familiar voice came through, the smooth, taunting tone of Marcus Hale. "I think it's time we had another conversation." Ethan placed the call on speaker, his voice icy. "There's nothing left to discuss, Hale." "Oh, I disagree. Your little stunt in Chicago created quite the mess. But unlike your dear Jenna, I have resources, connections, ways to clean things up. Is there a point to this?" "The point, Mr. Grant, is that while you were busy trying to destroy me, you missed something crucial." Marcus chuckled. "Did you ever wonder why Jenna's expense reports always matched her calendar perfectly? Why there was always a neat paper trail, as if someone wanted to get caught?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Check your email," Marcus said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "I think you'll find the truth very enlightening. And remember this moment, the realization that you've been playing checkers while I've been playing chess." The line went dead. Ethan's fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as he opened his email. What he saw made him freeze. A new message had arrived, containing email exchanges between Jenna and an FBI cybercrime task force, dating back 18 months, all authenticated by federal servers. Jake's eyes widened as he read over Ethan's shoulder. So, her letter was telling the truth. Ethan stood abruptly, his expression a mixture of shock and denial. This is just another trick. Another lie. Or maybe you were wrong. Jake's tone grew hard. Maybe, in your rush for revenge, you took down the wrong person. Get out, Ethan growled, turning his back on Jake. But Jake didn't budge. Listen to yourself, Ethan. Jenna was trying to take down a criminal, and you helped him destroy her because your pride couldn't handle it. She lied to me, Jake. Ethan's voice shook with frustration. For 18 months, she hid everything from me. To protect an investigation. To stop a man who's wrecked countless lives. Jake's voice softened, tinged with disappointment. But no, the great Ethan Grant couldn't stand not being in control for 1 second. Couldn't accept that maybe the world doesn't revolve around his precious need for order. Ethan ended the conversation, his office suddenly feeling claustrophobic, the walls of certainty he'd constructed around himself crumbling. On his monitors, news articles updated by the second. Hale declares vindication, I was set up. Former executive Jenna Grant implicated as fraud ringleader. SEC expands investigation into corporate espionage. His phone buzzed with a final message from an unknown number, I never betrayed you, Ethan. But I'll never forgive you for betraying me. Goodbye. Without a second thought, Ethan deleted the text. Outside his window, Dallas shimmered in the evening light, the city carrying on while his carefully constructed world fell apart. But he wouldn't help Jenna. He wouldn't try to repair what he'd torn down. Because even if she'd been working with the FBI, she'd still kept him in the dark, still hidden secrets, still made him feel like a fool. And Ethan Grant never forgave, never forgot, never showed mercy. Even when he was wrong. The next morning, he dressed with his usual precision, straightened his tie in the mirror, and checked his phone, knowing no messages would be there. Mr. Grant, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. The FBI agents are here to take your statement. Send them in. Ethan sat at his desk, his posture immaculate. Let's see how deep this hole goes. Because in the end, he'd rather watch it all burn than admit he'd made a mistake. Rather see Jenna destroyed than acknowledge his own role in her downfall. Cold, calculated, unforgiving. Just like always.